Hello, welcome to Monday's Hotline Live with Record Sport. My name is Daniel Coe. I'm delighted tonight to be joined fresh from the Rangers EGM by Record Sport's Scott McDermott and Andy Newport. Scott, how's it going?
Not bad, Daniel. Yourself?
I'm very good, thanks. Andy, you well?
Very good, yes. Raced home through the traffic to make sure we're here ready to address the nation. So let's get going.
Dedicated. He's no hero. And we've actually been big-timed by Keith Jackson tonight. He's away to the Pride of Scotland Awards, which is good to know where his priority lies. Do you know what I mean, Scott?
Well, as I said before, I mean, our invites clearly get lost in the post. Hasn't mentioned it at all, not a peep for him the whole week, and then he's away, glitz and glamour, red carpet and all that. Can't believe it.
Look, if he can sleep at night, that's all that matters.
Exactly.
Before we go any further, I think we should start by talking about a guy that there's not many people in Scottish sport, never mind football, that justify the tag legend, but John Clark was definitely one of them. He's obviously sadly passed away today at the age of 84. A Lisbon Lion, a Celtic great. I don't really know what else, other adjectives we can throw at him. Just an amazing life, an amazing career.
Just a legend, Daniel. You've said it. I mean, I didn't know John personally, but had kind of said hello to him a few times, seen him a lot on Celtic trips and pre-season. Obviously, when he was kit man at the club, and people spoke so highly of him, not just because of the playing career he had, which was obvious, but even, as I say, when he was still working in and around the club, just what a guy he was. All the people that worked around him, the kit department, people that took over from him, they all spoke about how brilliant a guy he was. So no, really sad news today, and quite unexpected. Also, I haven't seen him for a while, but it's sad we think of that team, such a legendary team in kind of Scottish football terms, even European terms. But they're all getting older. I've lost a few of them. No many left now. So no, really, really sad news.
Aye. In fact, Andy, before I bring you in, these comments probably do better justice than we can. Stephen says, I met him in the changing room and we've brought him over to the Netherlands. He had a mighty presence about him. He just oozed class and an authority. RIP. A brilliant person who had integrity, was respected and epitomised everything wonderful about Celtic. Can't really say fair on that, can you?
Absolutely not. I mean, like Scott, I don't remember meeting him on too many occasions. I do remember interviewing him once. Sort of Motherwell Ravenscraig at the Sports Centre, I think it was. Just an absolute class act. Scott says a fantastic icon in Scottish football in terms of what he achieved with the Lisbon Lions. But I think the mark of a man's always more about him himself, the personality of him, and these guys, these great characters that we seem to have fewer and fewer of these days. He was certainly one of them. Just an absolutely tremendous representative of Celtic, of Scottish football, and he'll be absolutely very, very sadly missed.
Aye, well said. And obviously our thoughts go out to John's family and friends. Right, moving on to the football. Scotsman in Spain says the new Rangers owners look the business, and of you guys were present for the Rangers EGM earlier today. Scott, were you impressed by what the new owners had to say?
I was very impressed, Daniel, I must admit. The first time we'd met them, obviously me and Andy were at the EGM first, so we heard a wee bit from them. Then we were lucky enough to actually sit down with Andrew Cavenagh and Paraag Marathe in person. And I have to say, just really, really impressed, especially with Andrew Cavenagh. I have to say, Paraag Marathe was kind of as I expected him to be, with his kind of background with 49ers and Leeds. Obviously, he's heavily involved in sport and football already. I don't know what I was expecting for Andrew Cavenagh, but he kind of surpassed my expectations just in terms of how well he came across. A real presence about him, stature. Me and Andy were talking, he used to be a goalkeeper. He's kind of got that goalkeeper's kind of
big shovel hands. I shook his hand at one point and nearly broke the knuckles.
And just spoke with a real authority, decisiveness. There's a bit of humour thrown in there as well, both at the EGM and when we spoke to him. But also there's just that air of kind of ruthlessness about him. I thought he's not going to accept second best. That's not why he's here. I think the big change for Rangers, this is just a general thing, but I think in the last, maybe the last decade, certainly the last few years, there's been a real lack of accountability for me. In terms of people within the club and the kind of lack of success that the club's had. I think that's all going to change now. I think every person that's going to work under this new regime at Ibrox is going to feel pressure to deliver, and that includes the men at the top, Cavenagh and Marathe, but also the people that are working under them, whether that be Russell Martin as head coach, Kevin Thelwell as sporting director, right down to probably the staff at Auchenhowie. I just don't think these guys are going to settle for anything less than the best. And well, as I say, it was just one meeting. We had a good chat with them. As I say, I thought they came across really well. And if you're a Rangers fan and you get to listen to it or read the stuff in the record in terms of the quotes, I think it will be hard not to be really excited if you're a Rangers supporter tonight about what the next few years might look like.
Before I bring you in, Andy, we can actually hear a little bit of Andrew Cavenagh from today's EGM. Let's hear what he had to say.
Thank you for the very warm welcome. I think I'm supposed to sit, but sitting here looking out, I figured it wasn't the right way to start this relationship by us starting in a low block. The one thing that every one of us has a limited amount of is time. And so on behalf of Paraag, Fraser, Patrick, and everybody at the club, we really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today to have this important conversation. Last October, I got a phone call, and I will never forget exactly where I was when I got the phone call, because I think it's a moment that has changed my life. And the phone call was, would you and your group have an interest in investing in Rangers? And I said, absolutely. And over the last however many months, this has been 9 months, there are a lot of different things that are attractive and fantastic about this club, but I find myself talking about 3 more often than anything else. And those 3 are first and foremost you, the supporters. It is an incredible supporter base, and it's not just the numbers. Millions of supporters, I think 600 supporter clubs worldwide. I think the club sold over 400,000 kits a year ago. So massive, massive numbers, but it's also the depth of the passion. I know that for many of you, being a supporter probably started in the womb. You were born into this, and it's something that you feel right here in any conversation you have with a supporter. So the breadth and the depth of the passion of the fans is the number one thing that I love about this club. Number 2 would... Now I'm going to be self-conscious. If you don't clap when I say something, I'm going to assume that didn't land as well. Number 2 would be Ibrox. I think of that as our castle. It is an incredibly tough place to come and play as a visiting squad, and that is fantastic because it gives us a competitive advantage. And then on the flip side, it's a magical place to be there as a supporter. So number 2 would be Ibrox itself. And 3 would be the competitions in which we play. Every year, we get to compete for the league, 2 cups, and we get to play in Europe. And those are incredibly special things. I think if you look at football clubs around Europe, most clubs would love to have one of those 3 things, and yet we are lucky enough, fortunate enough to have all 3 wrapped into one.
It's only a couple of minutes of hearing Andrew Cavenagh, Andy, but certainly seems to be saying all the right things.
Yeah, I agree with Scott. I thought he was... Both he and Paraag Marathe, Marathe, did he?
No, Marathe.
Marathe, yeah, so he did clarify the pronunciation, but I managed to forget it already. Yeah, I thought the 2 of them were very, very slick. I thought they were polished. I thought they were convincing in what they said. Listen, I mean, these, we all know that these EGMs can be like at times. Obviously, the Q&A sections, you get some fans that get up and really ask some really pointed questions, some interesting questions, and some other guys have got more personal things they want to talk about. but I felt that there was obviously some scepticism or some concern that fans wanted addressed. Things like obviously the stadium, things like the role that shareholders are going to play, whether or not there's going to be a chance for shareholders in future to be able to ask these questions. Obviously, the club's now been taken back into private hands, a private company now, so legally there's not a requirement for them to hold AGMs as such now, but they've assured the shareholders that they will be doing that. And listen, I think every Rangers fan, given events in the not so distant past, will remember what happened to their club, and they should be getting into these situations where there's obviously new people coming to the club and asking probing questions. But I felt that the new guys in charge dealt with that very well. They obviously were asked about in terms of one of the fans got up and asked, what's your end game? You're obviously going to want a return on your investment. How do you see yourselves monetising that? And Andrew Cavenagh gave I thought it was a really sharp line, saying, listen, we've not got an exit plan, we've got a growth plan. We'll only worry about an exit plan once the growth plan succeeds. And I think the thing that you have to say is that these are high caliber individuals. These are guys that are coming in that have succeeded in the business world, and it's not like, I know Rangers fans want to hear his name again, but it's not like when Craig White came in and you knew nothing about him and there was very little information that you could get about this guy. There's a track record there that you can look at with Paraag, Marathe, where you look at his involvement with 49ers, his involvement in Leeds, and you can go there. Yeah, that's a guy that is proven that he can be successful in this sporting business world. And then also Andrew Cavenagh with this huge American health insurance company, so turning over hundreds of millions of pounds a year. So you can tell these are guys that have got a very high level of expertise in that sense, and that should be a reassurance to the fans. But I think what would be more reassuring is listening to them and hearing them spell out their plans for the club. And Scott's right, it all seems very exciting. The proof will be in the pudding. They now need to go and basically fulfill what they promised today. But if they can deliver upon what they've suggested as their end today, then I think the Rangers fans will be very, very, very happy.
We've obviously got plenty of comments coming in. If you want to get involved in the conversation, please do so in the comment sections below. Scott, obviously there's a lot of Celtic fans are rather cynical about today's EGM. Slickett says, Cavenagh made no promises about any of the 20 million going towards transfers or any guarantees of further investment. Rangers fans should be really worried. John says he's telling the gullibles what they want to hear. And Hugh says, wasn't the same reception when Craig White took over and Chick Green. But on the flip side, there is a lot of Rangers fans who seem to be really excited as well. Raymond says, I thought Marathe and Cavenagh came across really, really well today and very optimistic. And Derek is over the moon, it sounds like. It's brilliant to be part of the 49ers, pulling on their wealth, resources, knowledge and legal acumen and having an EPL feeder club. And finally, Lillian says they've 20 million from the day to go shopping. Let's hope they make smart purchases and strengthen the team. That's the thing that Andy says, Scott. They still have to go out and do the business now.
Aye, of course they do, but this is different, Daniel. This isn't Craig White or Charles Green coming in. I mean, you're stupid if you think it's not a million miles for that. And look, they might not spend 20 million in this window. They might not spend 20 million in the next year. But the comforting thing for Rangers fans is they are now. No, there is now money there. There is not that worry. No, we spoke just before we came on air about. No, previously, even Rangers won the title in 2021, it still felt as if the club was living hand to mouth. It was still soft loans and investors putting money in, fans of the club essentially keeping the place going. This feels different, very different. Both of the guys spoke about that today, that there is now a comfort there. There's a security. They don't need to rush into decisions. They don't need to rush into signings. They don't need to rush into selling players. So that if the price isn't right, this is very different. This is proper. Certainly in Marathe's case, a sporting professional who is who's been part of two kind of big turnarounds in recent years, obviously at 49ers and Leeds United. So he's coming in with that blueprint, which he thinks will be successful. And he made no kind of. He didn't hide the fact that he was coming in with the same blueprint at Rangers because he felt it was going to work and could turn the club around. But I mean, I don't know what some fans, maybe opposition fans, think. Kind of having a go at them, and saying it's never going to. I mean, they're here because they wouldn't be here if they didn't think they could win, and they didn't think they could be the #1 club in Scotland. Be a complete waste of time, as Andy says. Andrew Cavanagh's got businesses all over the place, based in Philadelphia. Why would they be bothering coming to? He spent basically the last 3-4 months in Glasgow, going to Turkey to see Fenerbahce, Rangers, going to Celtic Park. He said to me and Andy the day he'd seen Ibrox at its coldest when he turned up for a Dundee United game. He didn't even have big jacket on. He couldn't believe how freezing it was in Glasgow. They were quick to tell him that's just the norm. For Scotland,
that's just July.
I was going to say, I get used to that.
So he's I don't know. Listen, this isn't going to change overnight for Rangers. They're not just going to hit the ground running, immediately topple Celtic and go and win multiple titles. It's going to take a bit of time. But the key thing for Rangers fans is they are now in a far better position to go and do that, a far better position to go and challenge Celtic, improve the squad. I think the infrastructure in terms of appointments within the club, I think that will be ongoing. There's still a lot of work to do, but the two guys admitted that themselves today. That this is just the start. I mean, Andrew Cavenagh said he got that phone call in October, sitting in a cafe in Manhattan. He said it kind of changed his life, and it's been, what's that, 8 months in total to get the deal done. So it's been a long process, but he was quick to say this. Today is the start of it, basically. Today is the start of the journey for him and the Rangers fans. And I just don't think you can get away from the fact, irrespective of what other clubs think or the challenge that Rangers might put up. If you're a Rangers fan, I think this is a really exciting day in terms of what might lie ahead in the next few years.
It's something I've been saying here for ever since Keith broke the story of the Andrew Cavenagh and the 49ers looking to take over the club, and it was actually mentioned again by one of the shareholders that was asking the question today. He says at the very least it just gives them, the Rangers support, hope, because without this, if this was the old regime, you get in here after another failed season, another failed title race, another season with the ended empty-handed and miles behind Celtic, then what would there be for the Rangers support to be looking forward to this summer? Without this, it would be another bleak couple of months watching the club scramble about, trying to make signings with no idea whether or not they're going to be a success. Of course, you're still in that situation now, but at least there's just this takeover, the fresh faces, the track record of what they've done elsewhere, I think gives, at the very least, scope for optimism, scope for hope, and that's what the Rangers fans will be clinging to. Listen, that could all get very quickly, washed away if the team makes a bad start, trips up in the Champions League qualifiers. Asked, Andrew Cavenagh today if he was the question I'd asked that Scott was referring to there. I'd said you've seen Ibrox at its loudest, the Fenerbahce game. I said he's seen Ibrox at its angriest a couple of occasions when results hadn't gone their way. At that point, he wasn't the one in the final line. He is now. He's going to be the guy having to face the flak if things don't go, if things get off to a bad start. He's perfectly happy with that. He's been a businessman. He's dealt with being the guy with the buck stops for all of his professional life. He knows what it's like to make decisions and to get some decisions wrong and have to deal with the repercussions of that. So listen, this is going to be magnified by 1,000,000%. Nothing he's experienced in his business life will come close to the pressure he's going to face if Rangers, lose an Old Firm game or lose a couple of games at home. But listen, as I said, Scott said he seems quite a assured character, and he seems to believe that he can handle it. As I said, proof will be in the pudding. But as I said, I think the Rangers fans can certainly have room for more optimism than would have been the case otherwise.
Rangers is okay, Andy. Echoes that, saying, I think if this didn't happen, Andy, the waiting list for season tickets would have been severely tested, because I know for a fact a lot of people were ready for chucking it. And also, earlier in the show, Andy, you mentioned about the EGMs. A couple of people saying this, that Cavenagh said pre-EGM they'd still have an AGM. However, later in the media meeting, he said there'd be no AGMs. That's not the case?
It's not going to be a formal AGM in the sense, but what he's promised is that there will be an opportunity every year, at least once, where the board will sit down with shareholders, allow them to ask questions. He was quite clear that that is something they want to do. He did say in the sit down that Scott and I were at, that listen, they'll have to establish the format of that, but he has given the assurance that shareholders will be allowed to put their questions, try and hold the board to account. Listen, we'll see if that happens. I think if it were backtracking that would be a pretty poor start. But listen, from what he said today, he was pretty clear that was what that was a gesture or an undertaking. He was happy to give that they would sit down, and because one of the questions also asked about the fact is that they now own 51%, just to get the technicalities of it, because they are a foreign consortium that bought the club. They are no longer bound by the rules of the takeover panel. Ordinarily, if you'd bought this amount of shares, they would have been liable to have to make an offer for the remainder of the club shares. Because they are from abroad, from America, they are not bound by the rules of the takeover panel. So it effectively renders the rest of the 49% of the shares not useless, but they don't have certainly the shareholders, the existing shareholders, don't have that opportunity to cash in their shares that they would had it been a UK-based consortium. So, but to assuage the fears that these shareholders are going to lose their voice, they have given this undertaking that they will be back once a year at the very least, if not more, to talk to shareholders and get their thoughts and opinions and answer their questions.
And Scott, a lot of Rangers fans want to hear about transfers. Rangers EGM again says the transfers were interesting. Obviously, they can't give an answer to the question of the budget, but then saying we need to invest in the team to see improvements suggests there is a few quid there. Did they drop any hints at all about any incomings this summer?
I don't know about dropping hints, but I mean, do people expect them just to say, here's exactly what we're going to spend on the transfer budget? No, I mean, that's just...
Make your life a lot easier, Scott.
I certainly would. But as Paraag Marathe said, no, they need to think about themselves in the transfer window in terms of wheeling and dealing. If they come out and say we're going to spend this and we're going to do that, that can then impact on negotiations with clubs and stuff like that, and just lets people know you would never do that in the market. So I don't blame them for that. I just don't think there's any doubt they're going to spend money. Whether it'll be the 20 million, no, exactly, probably not. A lot of that will depend, obviously, on who comes in, what money comes in for players as well. But they will undoubtedly spend. I'm sure Andy will agree. I'd be amazed if there's no at least 2 signings coming in this week. For instance, Russell Martin's already said he'd expect, I think his words were, a few to be added before the Panathinaikos game, which again you would expect, and that should happen. There will definitely be movement in and out. And as I said earlier, just in terms of having that bit of financial comfort, I think if there's a player, I'm not saying Rangers are going to spend millions, but I think if there's a player becomes available that they really want in this window and it works for them, I don't think they'll be afraid to spend some serious money if they think it's going to vastly improve the squad. They were asked about bids coming in for players like Raskin being the obvious one, and again they were very kind of keeping their cards close to their chest. But I think Andrew Cavenagh said, look, the way football is now, that for every club outside the top 5 leagues in Europe, it has to be a case of bringing players in on relatively low cost and with the hope of selling them on. But we all know that's the model for clubs like Rangers and Celtic. So he hinted that if big bids come in, of course they'll consider them, but only if it's right both for the player and the club. And I think the key thing will be if, for instance, a big bid came in for Raskin and Rangers decided to take it. No, they now have the kind of financial wherewithal to go and replace him properly and go and bring real quality in. So, no, well, I think they'll spend money. The exact amount, I'm not sure, but there'll certainly be a few players in before the Champions League qualifier.
I do think some of that £20 million that is obviously going to be injected, some of it, a small chunk, I think, will be set aside for the stadium. They've been talking about wanting to upgrade. Obviously spoken about wanting to enlarge Ibrox, but I don't think that's something that's going to be in the short term. I think they've obviously made the priority as fixing things in the pitch before they do the rest of the stadium. But I think they've already spoken about wanting to upgrade some of the hospitality lounges, maybe the concourses and other facilities around Ibrox. But eventually that will be something they get round to. And, that is a huge undertaking. You're talking about, as we saw with the very small project in the Cloten Road this summer, the disruption that caused. So to really make a significant dent in the capacity of the stadium, that they really have to, that's a huge project, and it'll take a lot. And they weren't really able to give too many details on that today, even when we spoke to them about what that would entail. But they do have ambitions to that, so that will be, a lot of fans. That's something that they're keen to hear about. Just the fact that Rangers have got a deficit in Celtic every week in terms of the numbers that they can get into the ground and the knock-on effect that has on match day income. It means that every home game Celtic are making 9,000 fans worth more money, and that leaves Rangers playing catch up for day dot before you factor in Champions League prize money and transfer sales. So that's something that they do have to address sooner than later. But first things first is they need to get the product on the pitch fixed.
And Gianni rightfully says, hopefully use different builders than this time last year. That's a good point.
Certainly a different chief executive.
True. Very good point.
That's the more pressing concern, probably.
Very good point.
But that's the key thing. Andy's saying, no, obviously the priority is the team on the pitch just now. And that has to be the case because ultimately, you think a lot of questions that got asked today at the EGM. We obviously asked a lot of questions as well. The most pertinent one, I think, for any supporter is, how quickly can Rangers catch Celtic? How quickly can Rangers bridge the gap? You're talking about a gap that was 17 points at the end of last season. Celtic on 4 titles in a row, going for 5. A top, established, proven manager at a really high level, and potentially 70-80 million in the bank already, with potentially more Champions League money to come. That's the gap that has to be bridged quickly. To me, that is the key question, and that's where I think Rangers fans will be really encouraged when they hear the response to that from Paraag, Marathe, but mainly Andrew Cavenagh, because he's saying unequivocally that he doesn't like losing, doesn't want to be second best, and if they didn't think they could bridge that gap and become Scotland's #1 club again, then he simply wouldn't be here. And he vowed, certainly in our kind of briefing with him, he vowed that they will do that as quickly as they possibly can. They know it won't be easy. They know there's a lot of work to do, but they believe they can do it. I think one of his quotes were, we've been second for, I think somebody asked basically, how far away are you from Rangers fulfilling their potential? And he said, well, it's a simple answer. We've been second and we want to be first, so we're only 1 place away. That is the #1 target for them. And as I say, to me, listen, stadium expansion would be brilliant, but that's further down the line. Even stuff at Ibrox, the #1 priority has to be to bridging that gap to Celtic. And as I say, that was the real encouraging thing, I think, for punters today, to know how determined and how kind of single-minded and how focused they are on doing that, and not just doing it, but doing it quickly.
We're into stoppage time in today's show, but I wanted to finish by talking about Celtic. Reports today in Germany that RB Leipzig are apparently, quotes, in advanced talks over signing Nicholas Kuhn. A fee of £15 million has been mentioned. This is after yesterday, the Newcastle Chronicle published that apparently Newcastle are taking a serious look at Kuhn. Look, I know he scored 21 goals last season, Andy. I think he's obviously a very talented player. But for a player that was signed for £3 million, I think if Celtic were getting 15, personally, if it was up to me, I would take that.
I think that's what Celtic have done so well over the last 10, 15 years is they bring somebody in, they polish them up, they get more importantly, they get a turn out of them on the pitch, they contribute, and nobody can deny that Nicholas Kuhn, especially the first 5-6 months of the season, was almost unplayable. And then they move him on and they back themselves to go and find his replacement. And so, listen, I think it was a bit like I was on yesterday talking about Rangers and Niko asking if Rangers would get bids in that region, having spent £2.5 million, and you take it. And I think Celtic do exactly the same here, because I think importantly as well is to consider that Kuhn has had periods where he's dipped off a bit. Obviously, we know that when he first signed, he was struggling, he was having trouble with his teeth, and took him a while to overcome that issue. Obviously, starts the season in incredible form. So impressive, even in those early European games as well. Obviously, dips off a wee bit the second half of the season, but I think there's an aspect to that the league was already won. I don't think the pressure, the expectation levels to perform were quite the same, and I think there's a few players in that Celtic squad that allowed themselves just to drop their levels a bit, just because the pressure wasn't on them. But listen, he was terrific last season. At one point early on, I thought it was neck and neck between him and Desmond Maeda for Player of the Year. Obviously, he drops off, and Maeda maintained his level so impressively. But I think if Celtic could get £50 million for a guy, as you say, that can be up and down at times, I think that's a no-brainer. You take it. It's funny to see him going back to Germany after the way he was kind of written off as this, almost like unknown flop, almost the way that some of the German media spoke about him after his performances in Europe this season. I think if he does get it, it's a deserved move, because, as I say, he's been in spells, he's been absolutely terrific for Celtic.
What do you think, Scott? £50 million a fair price for Nicholas Kuhn?
For Celtic, definitely is. I think I said on here before, Daniel, me, you and Jacko were on, that 15 million, you absolutely bite the hand off for it. And that's take nothing away from Kuhn. He's a terrific player and had a brilliant season, but for that kind of money, I think you need to bite the hand off if that's what's being offered. And I just wonder, we touched on this, I say, last week sometime, and it's just a hunch. No, there's no kind of inside info, but it just feels like Kuhn maybe isn't quite 100% happy at Celtic, and maybe he's, I'm not saying he's angling for a move, but I don't think there's this speculation unless the player has intimated that he might be keen on a move. As I say, we interviewed him at Tannadice when Celtic clinched the title, and he came in and he was happy to win the league, but he was a bit grumpy as well about the kind of criticism that he'd had, and he felt as if he'd had to prove people wrong. He felt it was a bit unfair that he'd get a wee bit of flack when he hit that kind of dip. And maybe he was right, but I don't know, he just struck me as a guy that wasn't 100% kind of happy at Celtic. And it's interesting that now kind of several clubs have been mentioned. I think me, you and Jacko also spoke about his determination, desire to play for Germany. He spoke about it several times. And maybe he feels going back to the Bundesliga or going to the Premier League, obviously, will boost his chances of playing for the national team, despite what he's done at Celtic in the Champions League, which is obviously a great stage. But it just feels, you're just getting that feeling as the summer goes on that Kuhn might end up leaving, and that would certainly explain obviously why Celtic are keen to get the boy Nigrin in, who plays in a similar position, and they might need to go back. If Kuhn does go, they might need to go back for another winger after that. Certainly, if they're getting 15 million in the coffers, you'd expect them to go back into the transfer market and add another wide player. So it's going to be an interesting few weeks with Kuhn, but certainly for the outside looking in, doesn't look 100% happy, and it wouldn't surprise you if he's moved on if that big bid comes in.
Time will tell. Guys, I think that about does it for tonight's Hotline Live with Record Sport. Thanks so much for all the comments. We really appreciate it. We'll be back to do it all again at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Keith Jackson might be here unless he finds something better to do. Andy, Scott, it's always a pleasure.
Cheers, Daniel.
Thanks very much, and hope you can join us tomorrow. Cheers.